So we started the day with a robot that could drive around, had an arm that worked, and had an intake that worked, and I guess also something to push the boxes out. But we didn't have a climber yet, so we spent most of the day working on our climber. We were really restricted in that we only had 2 motors left, and we were dedicating both of them to being on the winch for the climber since we wanted the strength there. So we had to design our entire hooking mechanism to either use just that one motor or not use anything at all. So the big challenge was trying to make this single hook run off the same motors that we're using to then spool in the hook. So that was a bit of a challenge, but we got through it today.
So Team LC started up quite a bit farther back than Team Elijah yesterday. At that point, we pretty much only had a working drivetrain, and we had prototypes working for our intake and our shooter. At that point, we didn't really know what we were going to do with actually angling the shooter, but individually we had working prototypes, but nothing was really put together yet.
What did you decide are the most important things to progress on today?
So for us, we were actually pretty happy with where our robot was. We felt that we could actually compete with that. But the main big question that was remaining was getting that climber on. So we spent a lot of time just prototyping different geometry and trying to figure out the best way to make that climber.
We started with trying to improve some of the performance of our prototypes. Especially, well, the intake was perfectly fine, but we were more worried about the shooter and trying to get proper compression. So we actually took some plates and we milled out slots so that we could play around with compression and see how far we could get it to go.
So how much progress did you actually hope to make?
So we were hoping to improve our arm in that when we went all the way up to the top before we were a little bit tippy and almost falling over backwards. So we wanted to fix that issue and we wanted to get the hook completely done today. And we wanted to also make sure that the spooler would be strong enough to climb up. And we were actually quite successful. Both those components ended up working quite well.
We wanted to get about 2 feet of a shot. We wanted to improve our shooter shot to get it to reliably shoot around 2 feet. We unfortunately did not get to that point. So what we ended up doing is we cut off the bottom of our shooter and we turned it into a switch mechanism. So the robot would intake the milk crate at the bottom of the lift, it lift it up, and it just sort of dump it into the switch.
So what did you do to try and make that progress?
Kind of the same kind of thing we did the last couple of days. We broke up into a bunch of different teams working on the different parts so that we could work concurrently. So since we had a lot of steel to drill through, since we were trying to add ballast to the front of the robot, we had a bunch of guys on a bunch of drill presses all drilling that because it takes a long time to drill through that steel. And then for the hook mechanism, we had 2 teams working concurrently just trying to get the design of the hook into something that we could run completely passively, and then the other team working on getting the spooler done. So you split off into like 3 separate teams all working simultaneously, and then came together at the end to put it all on the bot.
Similar to Team Elijah, we actually split up into sub-teams too, one for every sort of subsystem. What's different, I guess, is that we had a couple people set aside to sort of think out the issues. We had a lot of concerns about how all of our subsystems were sort of going to be mounted together, and we had a couple people just dedicated to solving those issues.
And how much progress have you made throughout the competition?
We think we have everything done that we set out to do. So we managed to get the hook and the hook, like the latching mechanism, completely done and reliably working. We got all of our steel plates mounted to the front of the bot, so it's no longer quite so tippy. And so we've been running around testing it all day, and we've been pretty happy with the fact that it's being able to pretty reliably pick up the crates and plop them out at 2 different heights on the switch height and the scale height. And also all of our tests on climbing have been pretty successful too. So we're all around very happy. We think we've got a pretty thorough bot.
Us, on the other hand, I think we had a decent bot built in terms of for the 3 days. I had hoped to get a couple more things done, but it is what it is. Our bot can probably do the exchange, the switch, and it can, with some changes to the gear reduction on the gearbox, we can probably do the climb as well. And the climb wasn't something that we set up to do initially. It was something that we sort of just realized, oh, we have this much height already, we might as well just throw on some hooks and see what happens. And it ended up working out pretty well.
And so, what do you want to achieve next year?
I think one big step for us next year is more sensor integration and stuff like that. Our robot, since it's a 3-day build, of course we didn't have very high goals for getting sensors on and automation and that kind of stuff. But even the sensors that we did try to integrate kind of failed. So we were trying to get limit switches on so we could figure out when we have a crate loaded in, and a limit switch to find the bottom and the top positions of the arm, and then encoders on the drivetrains. We got the encoders on, but all the limit switches just kind of fell apart and didn't work out. So we're hoping we'll be able to get more sensors on next year so we can have a more competitive robot, and then take those sensors into our autonomous and build a better autonomous script. Because at this point, our autonomous is functional, but it's pretty loose considering the fact that we have no sensors.
I think in terms of goals for next year for Team Healthy, if we were to compete next year, is I think one of the bigger issues we ran into is the parts we had available. We found that we were very constrained by it. And I think going on to next year, maybe spending a little more time, like it's already very difficult to choose what sort of parts to source because you don't really know the challenge, and it could really go any way. So I think maybe spending a little more time to reflect on what sort of things that we use heavily this year and get more of them.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Both of our teams were frequently saying that for us, just because this is our first time doing this, right? The biggest constraint wasn't the fact that we were building a robot in 3 days and the time was the biggest constraint. It was more the parts. Like a lot of both of our robots, we were reflecting are they're more designed around the parts we had available, trying to use like only these handful of motors that we had to accomplish our goals, rather than the time being the biggest constraint.
The other thing is that we did have access to a machine shop, but time was a limit there.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
So then, like we could machine our own parts, but we don't exactly have enough time to like machine it out, like cut it all out and like test it, right? So we ended up buying a lot of cost components, but cost components are generally pretty specific, designed for like a certain task,
yeah.
And we really don't know what those tasks are going to be. So like utilizing that to, I guess, to the most effective point is sort of hard.
And any quick tips for teams heading into the season and the next 5 weeks of build?
I would say just really make sure you prototype. We almost made a really big mistake with our robot because our arm, as it swings up, just barely stays within the 16 inches. Because we did a really quick prototype, but we didn't really thoroughly CAD it and prototype things like that. So we almost had a robot that was completely illegal. So I mean, spending the time to like measure twice, as they say, like measure twice, cut once, and to really make sure you have a good prototype to validate your design is really important to make sure that your bots can end up being legal at the end and being ready for competition.
I definitely second what Matt was saying. Measure twice, plan it all out ahead, make sure all the ideas you have for all your subsystems actually work and work effectively. And I think on top of that, really take a step back and analyze the game, see what you think you can accomplish, and be realistic about your goals.
Yeah, like both of our teams, we listed climbing as the least important thing, surprisingly, in the entire game strategy. So for both of our teams, climbing was the last thing on our list of important mechanisms to get done. Just because we had a good discussion, we talked about what was the most important strategy. That's another really important thing.